Inheriting the old family cabin felt like a curse wrapped in a layer of nostalgia. When I pulled into the clearing, the sunlight barely pierced through the thick canopy of trees. The cabin stood there, a weathered relic, its wooden facade gray and splintered. I hesitated before stepping inside, a twinge of unease gnawing at me. The air was stale, suffused with the scent of damp wood and something else. Something that made my stomach churn. I shook it off as nerves. After all, it was just an old cabin. A family legacy even. But as I wandered through the small, cramped rooms, I noticed strange markings etched into the walls. Intricate patterns that seemed to twist and curl, their meanings obscured. I traced one with my fingers, feeling the grooves like the spine of a creature. A chill ran through me. Night fell quickly, the woods swallowing the last light. I lit a fire in the stone fireplace, the flames crackling in the suffocating silence. I thought of the stories my parents used to tell me about this place, the laughter the summers spent running wild. But now, as the shadows danced on the walls, those memories felt distant, tainted. The first night was punctuated by unsettling sounds. Whispers, barely audible, slithered through the cracks in the windows. At first, I dismissed them as the wind, but as the hours crawled by, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were more than that. I curled up on the old couch, clutching a pillow as if it could ward off whatever lurked outside. Sleep evaded me, and I spent the night staring into the darkness, straining to hear the slightest rustle. It was a sound like scraping, as if something were clawing at the ground just outside the door. My heart raced. I thought about the stories again. Dark rituals, a cult that had once thrived in these woods, driven by the promise of power. They'd vanished, leaving only whispers behind. Had they truly gone? The next day, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread, I ventured outside. The forest loomed, suffocating and thick. I stumbled upon remnants of what I could only describe as a shrine. Stone circles and charred bones littered the ground, overgrown with moss. I knelt down, nausea swirling in my stomach. I felt eyes on me, prickling my skin, as if the trees were watching. I left quickly, my heart pounding, but the sense of being followed only deepened. As night fell again, I fought against the rising tide of panic. I flipped through my phone's flashlight, illuminating the walls, the markings almost seeming to pulse with life. I closed my eyes, breathing heavily, and when I opened them, I thought I saw shadows moving, whispering, forming shapes that made my pulse quicken. They weren't just shadows. They felt alive. The following days bled together, each night worse than the last. I began to experience visions, flashes of the past, a circle of hooded figures, their chants echoing in my ears. I couldn't tell if I was awake or dreaming. Every night, I heard the scraping again, closer, more insistent, a promise of something I couldn't understand. I kept the fire roaring, but it did little to keep the darkness at bay. One evening, I ventured back to the shrine, driven by a force I couldn't explain. The air felt charged, electric, as if the forest were alive with anticipation. I knelt down, my fingers brushing against the cold earth, and that's when I saw it. A small wooden figure, crudely carved, lying among the stones. My breath caught. It looked like me. Panic gripped me as I scrambled to my feet, heart racing. The woods erupted in noise. Branches cracked, a chorus of whispers rose, and shadows swarmed around me, creeping closer. I ran, branches clawing at my skin, the forest a maze of horror. I could hear them behind me, screams, chants, the sounds of something ancient and hungry. I stumbled into the cabin, slamming the door shut. My heart thundered in my chest as I pressed my back against it. But the scratching persisted. Now on the walls, the roof, a cacophony that threatened to shatter my sanity. I could feel them, the cult, their presence seeping into the very wood of the cabin. They were angry, demanding something from me. Despair washed over me as I glanced at the walls, the markings now swirling, twisting into grotesque faces. I realized I had become part of their story, a tale of dread, of sacrifice. The whispers intensified, filling my mind, promising peace if I surrendered. But I fought back, screaming, knowing that surrender meant becoming one of them, trapped in this waking nightmare forever. With a final surge of adrenaline, I flung open the door and fled into the night, the forest closing in behind me. I could hear their laughter, echoing through the trees, but I didn't stop. I ran until the light of dawn broke, tearing through the suffocating darkness. I don't know if I'll ever return to that cursed place. The cabin remains, and so do the markings, waiting for the next lost soul to wander in, drawn by the whispers of the woods. I left with only a fragment of my sanity, and the chilling realization that some legacies are meant to be buried deep in the earth, far from the reach of light. I ran until my lungs burned, each breath a ragged gasp as I stumbled through the underbrush. The whispers faded into the distance, but I could still feel their presence, lurking just beyond the trees, taunting me. Dawn broke slowly, the sun's light struggling to penetrate the dense canopy, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. I finally collapsed at the edge of a clearing, my heart racing, my mind still reeling from the horrors I had witnessed. Felt safe here, at least for a moment. But I knew better. Safety was a fleeting illusion in these woods. As I caught my breath, I forced myself to think. What had I stumbled into? What kind of cult had existed here, and why had they been drawn to my family? Memories of my childhood flooded back. My mother's nervous glances whenever she spoke of the cabin. My father's dismissive laughter when I asked about the markings on the walls. They had known something, had tried to protect me from the darkness that lingered just beyond the threshold of our memories. I shivered at the thought. With a shaky resolve, I stood up and decided to return to the cabin. Maybe I could find something, anything that would explain what I had experienced. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I needed answers. The trek back felt longer, the forest seemingly shifting as I walked. Branches reached out like skeletal hands, the sounds of rustling leaves whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. When I finally reached the cabin, it loomed before me, darker than I remembered, the door ajar as if inviting me back inside. Steeling myself, I stepped over the threshold. The interior felt suffocating, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. I forced myself to look at the walls again, those sinister markings now almost pulsing with an otherworldly energy. I felt drawn to them, as if they were alive, as if they were calling my name. A sudden crash from upstairs sent my heart into my throat. I froze, listening intently. The sound had come from the bedroom, heavy, deliberate. I took a tentative step toward the staircase, each creak of the floorboards underfoot echoing in the stillness. What was up there? What had been disturbed? As I climbed the stairs, every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I pushed forward. The door to the bedroom stood ajar, a thin sliver of darkness spilling out. I reached for the handle, hesitating for a heartbeat before pulling it open. The room was empty, but it felt wrong. The air was charged, buzzing with an energy that set my teeth on edge. I stepped inside, scanning the room. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted and tangled as if someone had just risen from it. On the floor lay a small book, its cover worn and cracked. I bent down, picking it up, the title nearly worn away. The Cult of the Forgotten Woods. As I flipped through the pages, my blood ran cold. Diagrams, rituals, and names filled the brittle paper. There were drawings of the very markings that adorned the walls, alongside chilling illustrations of ceremonies. Sacrifices to appease something ancient. My fingers trembled as I traced a sketch of a wooden figure, eerily similar to the one I had found at the shrine. A vision hit me like a wave. Hooded figures dancing around a fire, chanting in a language that twisted my mind. I could see their faces, contorted in ecstasy, and I realized with a jolt that they were not just figures. They were my ancestors, trapped in their own cycle of worship, drawing me into their darkness. I stumbled back, gasping for breath. The walls felt as if they were closing in, the shadows stretching toward me like tendrils of a waking nightmare. I had to get out, but just as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow flitted past the doorway. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. Silence enveloped me, thick and suffocating. I reached for the door, but it swung shut with a force that rattled the room. Panic surged through me as I grasped the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Suddenly, the whispers returned, a cacophony rising to a fever pitch. They filled my mind, suffocating me, wrapping around my thoughts like a vine. I staggered back, my vision blurring. I could feel them, feel their longing, their hunger. They wanted me to join them, to become part of their story. I slammed my fists against the door, desperate. Let me out, please. But the door remained unyielding, and the room spun around me. I was losing myself in the darkness, the whispers promising power, knowledge, and freedom from the mundane. I felt my resolve waver, the darkness seeping into my veins. Then I remembered the figure, the one I had found at the shrine. It was my only chance. I turned back to the book, flipping through the pages, searching for something, anything that could break the spell they had cast. And there it was, a ritual, a way to sever the ties binding me to this place. With newfound determination, I gathered what I needed. A candle, a piece of chalk, and a handful of earth from the shrine. I knew I had to act fast. They were waiting, their patience wearing thin, and I could feel their eyes upon me, drawn by my desperation. I began to chant the words from the book, my voice shaky but rising in intensity. The air around me crackled with energy, the shadows recoiling as if stung. I drew the symbols on the floor, the chalk marking the boundaries of my will against theirs. I could hear the whispers crescendo, a storm of voices threatening to engulf me. As I completed the final symbol, a pulse of energy surged through me, and for a brief moment, the whispers ceased. I stood in the eye of the storm, trembling but resolute. I felt the weight of their presence pressing against the barrier I had created, straining to break through. And then, in the midst of it all, a voice broke through the chaos. A familiar voice that sent a jolt of recognition through me. You cannot escape us. The shadows shifted, coalescing into a figure cloaked in darkness, its face obscured. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, realization dawning. This was not just a voice from the past. It was my own flesh and blood, a remnant of the cult, bound to the very ground I stood on.
No.
I shouted, my voice raw with terror. You can't have me. The figure stepped forward, and I braced myself for the onslaught. The shadows writhed, pulling at my limbs, but I held my ground, focused on the ritual. I felt the energy building, drawing strength from my fear, from the knowledge that I was not alone. I was part of this legacy, but I would not let it consume me. With a final surge of will, I raised my voice and completed the incantation, pouring every ounce of defiance into the words. The room erupted with light, the shadows shrieking as they were pulled back, the figure faltering as the barrier held strong. For a moment, time froze, and I could see the past and present collide. The cabin shuddered, the walls vibrating as if the very foundation were alive. I held on, determined to break free, to sever the ties that bound me to this nightmare. But as the light reached its zenith, a chilling realization washed over me. This was not just a fight for my freedom. It was a battle for my soul. And the woods were not done with me yet. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The light surged around me, bright and blinding. A halo of energy that felt both protective and volatile. The figure before me writhed, its form twisting in agony as the shadows recoiled. I could see its features flicker, shifting from familiar to grotesque, as if my own fears were manifesting in its shape. Join us! It rasped, a voice echoing from the depths of my ancestry, a plea laced with desperation. You belong here. You have always belonged here. No! I shouted, grounding myself in my own resolve. I could feel the pull of my bloodline, the weight of generations pressing down on me, but I would not yield. The markings on the walls, the ancient rituals, none of it would claim me. As the light intensified, the room seemed to expand, the walls stretching and bending as if the very fabric of reality was fraying. I focused on the symbols I had drawn on the floor, channeling my energy into them, willing the barrier to hold. The whispers returned, a deafening roar, urging me to abandon my fight. But something shifted in me, a flicker of defiance igniting a fire in my core. I was not just my ancestors' descendant. I was my own person, shaped by my choices and my will. I would reclaim my story. With renewed vigor, I pressed on, repeating the incantation, each syllable resonating with the strength of my conviction. The shadows screamed, thrashing violently against my protective circle, desperate to reclaim their lost child. My heart raced, each beat synchronized with the pulse of the light. Suddenly, the floor beneath me began to tremble, the very ground seemingly awakening to the chaos. I stumbled, trying to maintain my focus, but the energy was growing erratic. The light flickered, and for a moment, I felt a surge of fear grip me. What if I wasn't strong enough? What if this was the end? Fight! A voice cried from somewhere deep inside, a reminder of who I was. I clung to that voice, letting it guide me through the tempest of fear and doubt. I focused on the book, the words swirling in my mind, anchoring me to the moment. The shadows converged, a wave of darkness crashing against my barrier. I felt it strain, felt the cold tendrils of despair trying to seep through. But I wouldn't let them in. I pressed on, pouring every ounce of my energy into the ritual, the symbols glowing brighter. And then, a crack split the air, a sound like shattering glass. The figure lunged at me, its shadowy hands reaching for my throat, but the light flared, forcing it back. It howled, a sound that resonated with anguish, and in that moment, I realized I was not just resisting, I was banishing them. I could see it now, the truth that had eluded me. The cabin, the woods, the cult. They were all tied to a dark history, a cycle of sacrifice and power that had ensnared my family for generations. I was meant to be the vessel for their legacy, but I refused to be another pawn in their twisted game. With one final incantation, I unleashed the full force of my will. The light erupted from the symbols, engulfing the room in a radiant glow. The shadows screeched, twisting and writhing as the barrier I had formed shattered their hold. I felt a rush of energy course through me, a connection to something greater, a collective strength, the spirit of those who had resisted before me. In that moment, I understood the true power of choice. I chose to break free, to sever the ties that bound me. The light enveloped the figure, its form dissipating into wisps of darkness, and with a final, anguished scream, it vanished. The room fell silent, the air now thick with stillness. I stood in the aftermath, the weight of generations lifted from my shoulders. The shadows no longer pressed against me, and for the first time, I felt a sense of freedom, a lightness that was almost foreign. But as I turned to leave, a flicker of doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. Was it truly over? The cabin felt different, the air charged with an unsettling energy, as if the remnants of the cult's presence still lingered. I hesitated, the whispers fading into a low hum, but I could sense something deeper, an echo of their anger. I stepped out of the bedroom, my heart racing, but the ground trembled again beneath me. I had banished the figure, but the very essence of the cabin seemed alive, pulsing with the anger of a past that refused to be forgotten. The walls began to tremble, and the markings glowed faintly, resonating with a power that felt both ancient and ominous. I rushed down the stairs, my instincts screaming at me to escape. But as I reached the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. I turned, panic surging within me as I saw the shadows coalesce once more, gathering around me like a storm. They were not gone. They had merely retreated, waiting for the right moment to strike. "No!" I shouted, my voice a mixture of defiance and fear. I couldn't let them take me back into that darkness. I had fought too hard, too long. But the shadows began to form again, coiling around my legs, creeping up my body. They whispered promises of power, seducing me with visions of what could be. I felt the weight of their temptation, the allure of their ancient knowledge wrapping around my mind. With every ounce of strength I had left, I reached for the book, flipping through its pages frantically. There had to be something, some final ritual or safeguard. My heart pounded in my chest as I searched, the shadows tightening their grip, the whispers growing louder. Then, a page caught my eye, something I had missed in my earlier panic. A counter-ritual. It promised not just protection, but a way to cleanse the cabin of its dark legacy, to purify the land that had been stained by blood. As the shadows wrapped around me, I began to recite the words, my voice barely rising above the chaos. I felt the power surge within me, the air crackling with energy. The markings on the walls flared, illuminating the darkness with a blinding light. The shadows shrieked, a cacophony of rage and fear as I continued to chant. I could feel the essence of the cabin resisting, pushing back against my will, but I pressed on, determined to reclaim not just my own fate but the fate of my family, the countless souls lost to this place. The light grew, blinding me, and for a moment, I felt myself being pulled apart, every fragment of my being drawn into the void. I had to hold on to my sense of self, to the love and memories that had brought me here. And just as I thought I might lose myself completely, the light burst forth with an overwhelming force, sweeping through the cabin, obliterating the shadows in its path. The walls trembled, and for the first time, I felt the very ground beneath me shudder in response. Not in anger, but in relief. I opened my eyes to a transformed space, the shadows dissipating like mist. The markings were still there, but they no longer pulsed with darkness. They glowed faintly, like memories etched in time, a warning and a reminder. Breathing heavily, I stepped back, realizing I was free. I had not only escaped the clutches of the cult but had severed their connection to this place. The air felt lighter, the suffocating weight of fear lifting as I took in the cabin anew. But deep down, I knew that while I had won this battle, the war was far from over. The woods still whispered, the past still lingered, and I was left with a chilling question. What would it take to truly free my family from the darkness that had haunted them for generations? I turned to face the open door, the woods stretching out before me. An invitation and a warning. I couldn't leave yet. There were answers waiting to be uncovered, secrets still buried beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, stepping back into the light, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. The real journey was just beginning. The air outside the cabin felt different, charged with a strange energy, as if the forest were holding its breath. The sunlight filtered through the trees, illuminating the path ahead, yet a heavy sense of foreboding lingered. I took a tentative step into the woods, my heart racing. What awaited me beyond the familiar boundaries of my family's legacy? As I walked deeper into the forest, the sounds shifted. The usual chirping of birds and rustle of leaves had faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. It was as if the woods were aware of my presence, weighing my intentions. I could almost hear the whispers again, a faint echo that slithered through the branches. Determined to find answers, I followed the remnants of the trail I had stumbled upon earlier, a path overgrown with grass and twisted roots. My thoughts were a whirlwind. What had drawn my ancestors to these dark rituals? What had they hoped to gain? And what had they sacrificed? The further I went, the more the atmosphere shifted. The trees grew denser, their gnarled branches reaching out like twisted fingers. I stumbled upon small clearing, the remnants of a fire pit still visible, stones arranged in a circle, charred remnants of wood scattered around. This must have been a gathering spot for the cult, a place where the air was thick with chants and sacrifice. Kneeling down, I examined the ground, my fingers brushing against the ash. Memories flooded back, the tales I had heard as a child about the woods swallowing those who ventured too far, about the whispers that could drive a person mad. I had dismissed them then, but now I felt the weight of their truth pressing down on me. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the trees, and the ground trembled beneath me. I jumped to my feet, heart racing. The shadows seemed to dance in the corners of my vision, whispering promises of power and belonging. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus. I had to remain strong. Just then, something glinted in the underbrush, a glimmer of metal catching the light. I knelt again, brushing aside leaves and dirt to uncover an object half buried in the earth. It was an old pendant, intricately designed with the same markings that adorned the walls of the cabin. I recognized it as a symbol from the book, a relic of the cult. Holding it in my palm, I felt a surge of energy, a connection to the past that both fascinated and terrified me. I could almost hear the whispers growing louder, more insistent, tugging at the edges of my mind. I had to resist. This pendant could either be a key to understanding their practices or a dangerous temptation that might pull me back into their grasp. As I pocketed the pendant, I felt a sudden chill in the air, and the whispers intensified. I glanced around, heart pounding, feeling eyes upon me. I wasn't alone. "Who's there?" I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence hung thick around me, and I could sense something lurking just out of sight. Then, from behind a tree, a figure emerged. A young woman, her hair wild and tangled, clothes tattered and dirty. Her eyes were wide with fear, but they held a spark of recognition. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice trembling. "They'll find you." "Who will?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" "The cult," she whispered urgently. "They're still watching. They won't let you go so easily. You've stirred something up." She glanced nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting shadows to creep from the trees. Are you part of them?" I stammered, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. "No," she said vehemently, taking a step closer. "I escaped, but they've marked you. I can help you, but you have to trust me." Her sincerity struck me, and I hesitated. "Why should I trust you? How do I know you're not trying to lead me back to them?" "Because I was like you," she replied, urgency lacing her tone. "I inherited this curse, too. I've seen what they do, what they're capable of. You need to leave now." Before I could respond, the ground shook again, and a low growl reverberated through the air. The trees rustled violently, branches snapping as if something was pushing through the thicket. My heart raced. Whatever it was coming closer. "Run!" she shouted, grabbing my wrist. I didn't hesitate this time. We sprinted through the underbrush, weaving between trees, the sounds of the forest transforming into a cacophony of chaos. Behind us, the growling intensified, a guttural sound that echoed with an otherworldly hunger. We burst into another clearing, but it was different. Overgrown, the remnants of another ritual long forgotten. Scattered stones marked a circle in the center, and I could see more artifacts. Worn bones, remnants of offerings long since decayed. The air felt thick with history, the very ground seeming to pulse with memories of pain and sacrifice. "There's a way out," the woman panted, glancing back at the treeline. "If we can reach the river, we can lose them. They don't follow water." "Then what are we waiting for?" I urged, my adrenaline surging. We dashed toward the edge of the clearing, but the growling grew louder, more insistent. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, forming shapes that seemed to ripple with malice. "Keep going," she yelled, pushing me forward. We plunged into the thicket, branches tearing at our clothes, the sounds of the cult echoing in the distance. I could feel the pendant in my pocket, warm against my skin, as if it were alive. The forest closed in around us, the path winding and treacherous. I could sense something lurking just behind us, but I didn't dare look back. I had to trust this stranger, trust that she was my ally in this nightmare. Finally, we broke through the trees and stumbled into a shallow river, the water glistening under the dappled sunlight. I paused for a moment, the coolness of the water inviting, but the growls from the forest urged me to move. The woman splashed in, gesturing for me to follow. "Quick!" she urged, her eyes wide with urgency. "We can't stop now." We waded deeper into the river, the water rushing around us. As we moved farther from the shore, I could feel the weight of the forest lifting, the oppressive shadows receding. But just as relief washed over me, I heard a loud crack from the treeline, a dark shape emerging, looming and monstrous. "What is that?" I gasped, fear gripping me. "Keep moving," she shouted, her voice fierce. "It's a guardian of the cult. They'll send it to retrieve you." The creature loomed closer, a shadowy mass with twisted limbs and glowing eyes. It was a manifestation of everything I had fought against, a reminder of the darkness that had consumed my family. I felt its gaze lock onto me, a chilling awareness settling over my skin. "Don't look at it," the woman urged, pulling me deeper into the water. "Focus on the river. It's our only chance." I clenched my teeth and willed myself to keep moving, but fear threatened to freeze me in place. The water surged around us, the river swift and powerful. I could feel the current tugging at my legs, and with each stroke, I concentrated on breaking free of the shadows that still clung to me. "Almost there," she called, splashing through the water. "Just a little further." But the guardian was relentless, a dark force pressing against the edges of my consciousness, whispering temptations of power, promises of knowledge that felt both alluring and dangerous. I fought against the urge to turn back, to embrace the darkness that sought to reclaim me. With one final push, we reached the opposite bank, tumbling onto the soft grass, breathless and trembling. I looked back, my heart pounding, expecting to see the creature emerge from the water. But it hesitated at the edge, dark tendrils swirling around it as if the river was a barrier it could not cross. "It's afraid," the woman breathed, watching it intently. "We've escaped for now, but it won't stop hunting us." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "What do we do now?" "We need to find shelter and regroup," she replied, glancing over her shoulder. "But first, we must figure out what you know about the cult. You're more important to them than you realize." The weight of her words settled over me. I was part of this twisted legacy, but how? I needed answers, not just for myself but for the generations lost to this darkness. As we caught our breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that my journey was only just beginning. A fight not just for survival, but for the soul of my family and the woods that had bound us for so long. "We need to keep moving," I said, my resolve strengthening. "Whatever it takes, we'll confront this darkness together." The woman nodded, and as we set off deeper into the unknown, I felt a flicker of hope. The shadows may have marked me, but I was no longer alone. Together, we would unearth the truth buried within the forest and confront the legacy that sought to claim us. The woods would not have the last word, not today. We pressed onward, the sun dipping lower, casting long shadows through the trees. The woman, whose name I learned was Alara, led the way, her instincts sharp and alert. As we navigated the dense undergrowth, she shared her own story, how she had escaped the cult's grasp and lived on the fringes of the forest, always looking over her shoulder. Our shared determination fueled us. Finally, we stumbled upon an abandoned cabin, much like the one I had inherited. It felt eerily familiar but also a safe haven. Inside, we found remnants of past occupants, torn pages from books and crude drawings that hinted at the dark rituals practiced long ago. Alara and I examined the sketches, piecing together the cult's history. Each revelation felt like peeling back layers of a curse, uncovering the motivations behind their sinister actions. The markings, the very ones I had seen in my cabin, were maps to ancient sites scattered throughout the woods, each tied to the cult's power. "We need to destroy these places," Alara said, her voice firm. "If we sever their connection to this land, they'll lose their strength." We devised a plan, gathering supplies and setting out at dawn. One by one, we sought out the sites marked in the drawings, confronting the lingering shadows and breaking the circles of power. With each act of defiance, the darkness around us diminished, the whispers growing weaker. On the final night, we returned to the clearing where it all began, the air thick with tension. The guardian loomed before us, fury radiating from its shadowy form. "You cannot escape your destiny," it roared, its voice a haunting echo of the cult's past. But we stood united, our resolve unshaken. With the pendant glowing between us, we recited an incantation, one that would bind the guardian and free the land from its malevolent grip. Light erupted around us, illuminating the darkness. The guardian shrieked, a sound of pure rage and despair, as it was pulled into the light, dissolving into nothingness. With its defeat, the forest sighed, the oppressive weight lifting, and the air crackling with newfound freedom. Exhausted but triumphant, Alara and I embraced, knowing we had broken the cycle of fear. The woods felt different now, alive but no longer threatening. We left the clearing hand in hand, ready to forge a new path. In the days that followed, the haunting whispers faded, and I began to rebuild the cabin into a sanctuary, a place where the past could be honored but no longer held power. Alara stayed by my side, and together, we embraced the light that had finally come to the forest. The legacy of the cult had been vanquished, and as we stood at the edge of the woods, I knew the Real journey was just beginning, not as a descendant of darkness, but as a guardian of the light. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.